Good evening. I'd like to call the special meeting of the Board of Finance for Wednesday, May 25th in order. The agenda for this evening will be along the following. We will have public forum where the public is obviously welcome to come up and express their opinions about the budget and the deliberations, suggestions about how we should proceed. That will be followed by just a general roundtable discussion between the three elected boards here in town. We'll give individual members an opportunity to state some positions or make their feelings known about what has happened and what should happen. So feel free and just put your hand up. I'll try to make sure I give everybody equal airtime and make sure everyone has the opportunity to say something. And then I think we'll move to just general questions, Board of Finance general questions of the respective boards in terms of what ifs, what happens, or where, if we do this, what might happen, where would the impacts be felt. So with that, and then we'll have public forum at the close. We had scheduled a couple of meetings, one for tonight, obviously, and then another for Tuesday. However, we have just scheduled another meeting for tomorrow evening, owing to the fact that there's an exorbitant cost associated with publishing the budget. There are some charter requirements about how far in advance of the annual town budget meeting, which is currently slated for June 7th, and the referendum is slated for June 14th. But there are some requirements in terms of publication. If the board were to deliberate and make decisions on Tuesday, we would miss the opportunity to get it into the Guilford Courier for that week, meeting the 5-day advance publication. So we are anticipating this evening just general discussion. Tomorrow night's meeting will be held at the fire department, in the large room at the fire department at 7:30. As always, the public is welcome to attend and opine in public forum at the beginning and the close of our meeting. With that said, I'll open it up to public forum. The protocol is come on up to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and share with your opinion.
My name is Jonathan Trotta, and I reside at 74 Bayberry Lane. And there's quite a lot of politicians in this room. I'm glad I can't be counted among them. Sorry, little humor, guys.
Okay.
I've come up just as a citizen of Guilford, and I just wanted to express a couple opinions about what has happened. I presided on the Board of Finance at a time where I was a dissenting voice for Guilford residents who wanted to vote no and were worried about rising budgets. And I am pleased to see the voters have come out and they've spoken and they're concerned about the budgets and they're looking for our elected officials to make some cuts this time around. And I know that's a difficult thing and sometimes it can be very impractical, but I do think that on this occasion the voters have spoken. And I think that the Board of Finance has a duty now to consider if they do have to make those cuts in line with what the voters have called for, and maybe perhaps make some difficult decisions. And if some agreement can't be found to cut the budget, it may be a possibility that the board would consider something like an across-the-board cut. Another thing that I would like to mention is just an observation that the last go-around of cuts, I feel that the voters thought was not significant enough. I think they had spoken out for some cuts and that the amount of cuts that were made the last go-around were not significant enough. The other observation I have about the last round of cuts is that it seemed a little bit unfair that half of the cuts were absorbed by the town and half by the Board of Education, when the Board of Education budget is approximately twice as big as the town's budget. So I hope you'll carefully deliberate over what has happened and what the voters have called out for, and consider making the cuts as difficult as that may be. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it.
Sid Gale, 250 Flag Marsh Road. I voted for the first budget. I voted against the second budget. The reason I voted against the second budget was I felt that it was an interesting combination of cowardice and arrogance. And I say that with great regret because I respect many of you people on the boards. It was cowardice in the sense that, and I should add, by the way, that's a perception, but as you know, politics, perception trumps reality, and that happens to be my perception. I don't know how many other people shared it among the negative votes. It was cowardice in the sense that if you did a good job in the budget you crafted, to try to cut it based on 15% of the electorate, which isn't representative of the town, in my opinion, reflects the cowardice of believing in your own product. It's arrogance in the sense that a modest, in fact negligible cut that you did offer in the second budget is kind of like raising a middle finger to the electorate, which I can fully understand your visceral desire to do, but it doesn't fit well with your function. I, on the other hand, can take that liberty. I think it's very troubling that we can't even get 30% of the vote out, and we didn't on the second one. I can't understand why a community that thinks itself as educated and sophisticated and specific-oriented as we think we are can't get 50% of us out to vote on something that significantly affects our lives. That's a failure on the part of the electorate. I would have respected the boards more if you had said to the electorate in the second vote, this is our product, 15% doesn't cut it on your part, we did our job, the public needs to come out and do its job so that we have a clear understanding of what your capacities and what your priorities are. That hasn't happened yet. I would like to think that it will happen in the third round. But I seriously doubt that the tweaking of the line items that you might be inclined to do in the course of business as usual is going to get you to a product. So I would like to suggest kind of a short-circuit way to get to something that may be not perfect by any means, but it's going to give you more of an indication of where your electorate stands than we've had in the past two courses. I would just like to suggest a two-part referendum, or a referendum with two parts for the voters to vote on. The first part would be the budget, which I'll call the base budget, based on this current fiscal year's past budget, and with explanations of what's going to be cut in services and programs in order to accommodate the new demands that the next year's budget is going to have to face, so that people know what they're getting by necessity and what they're going to have to give up if they don't want to move the budget higher than it is. The second part would be what I'd call the supplemental budget, which, if you believed in your first work product, you should put back. And that would be the incremental increases that are able to sustain the level of services that we have now with the added mandatory elements that now have to be covered. So that would give everybody a chance to vote on the first one and probably approve it, those who are against your first budget as well as those who accepted it. And then those who realize what the trade-offs are can decide on whether or not they want to go the extra step for the supplemental budget. That should give you a much clearer indication than I think the past two referenda did. But I would suggest that whatever comes out of this third round, you seriously need to revise how you go about crafting a budget and communicating the budget to the public in the future. I don't get the comfort that you understand that we're in a new environment. We've been in it for the past 8 years. I think we finally hit the wall where we can't kid ourselves anymore. People who don't have stocks to sell that are in the investment and economic community are telling us that we're going to be in a period of stagflation, very much like where we've been for another 8 to 10 years. I don't think you should take that lightly, because I think that many people who would have supported budget increases in the past are being ground to the point that they no longer can. And if you don't understand that fundamental change in our demographic, you can't possibly put out a product that meets the needs of the people you were elected to serve. I think that as you look in the future, at the next budget, you need to look at it in terms of understanding priorities and not just line items. And having your departments think as from a voter standpoint rather than from their own functional and professional silos, which tends to be too often the case and gets organizations to the situation that we're facing now. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ed?
My name is Ted Zeus, live at 72 Broad Street. Got an email the other day from Ted Kennedy Jr. Talks about the fact that the Democrats announced a budget plan with no tax increases. And since then, I keep getting emails from him. Tells me that we've passed that both at the State House and also the State Senate. And I have some handouts for the people who are here tonight. If you want to pass those around, everybody can have one. So the highlights of this are that they basically are suggesting that we reduce spending. The state's got a bigger problem the town has, and they're trying to fill a $920 million plan to balance the budget of the state, and they want to reduce the spending to the level of 4 years ago. They think that's important for Connecticut's economic future. They are telling you that this plan does not raise income taxes, this plan does not raise sales taxes, this plan does not raise business or corporate taxes, and this plan does not raise business fees. The other part that they wanted to make a point of here was that their plan provides property tax relief to the cities and towns across Connecticut. So my first thing tonight is to just share with you that I'm in support of Ted Kennedy Jr.'s program. I think it's a good program, and it seems like it's going through. It's a bipartisan program at the state level, and I think that if they can do it at the state level, maybe we can do it at the town level. It might be helpful. Second thought was there's some discussion about what it was that we actually voted for the other day at the referendum. There seemed to be concerns about what it was we were actually asking people to vote for. This is on page 2, if you're following along in the paper. And I went to town hall today. They gave me a sample ballot, which I printed out and blew up so everybody could have a look at it. And it's interesting that on the sample ballot, it talks about that shall the town of Guilford approve the proposed amended budget for fiscal year July 1, 2016 through June 30th, 2017, as recommended by the Board of Finance to the special town budget meeting or as reduced thereby. But nowhere does it actually say what number we're voting for or how much we voted for last time or what the increase was. And so if you were a confused voter going to the polls, the town really gave you no guidance as to what in the world we were actually voting for on our last referendum. And so as a voter in town, I think that the ballot ought to be more clear. You know, I don't do deals in business if it's not in writing. I like to see all the details. And I'm inviting the town to put what it is that we're actually voting for in writing, in paper, on the ballot, so everybody who goes and votes actually knows what they're voting for. So when I went to the Board of Finance office, they said, well, what you were voting for is what we published in the paper, which is this right here. And it's a 4-page document. It was in the newspaper. I'm a bottom line guy. I went to the bottom line to see the expenditure summary and the revenue summary. And I look at this and it tells me right here that in 2015-2016 we approved spending $88 million. And it says that what the requested appropriations for 2016-2017 are $94 million. So that's a $6 million difference on an $88 million budget. That looks like a 7% increase in spending. And I know that I went to 2 public hearings prior to us voting on this and asked the question 2 times to the Board of Finance, what we were really voting on, where the money was coming from, and it was represented that we were voting on a 3% tax increase and a 4% spending increase. And we were rationalizing that the tax increase was 1% less than the spending increase because those of us who have lived in town for 20 years were going to see a 3%, and the guys who built their building in the last year were going to see a 100% tax increase, like the guys on the rock pile. So that averages out to actually a 4% tax increase, because we can't spend money that we don't raise. It has to come in. Now you can take the flip side of this argument. You can look at these numbers and you can say, well, the estimated expenditures for 2015-2016 were really $90,700,000. And the difference between that and what was advertised as the revised budget approved for 2015-2016, and this is in the newspaper, we all got this at our homes. This is what they hand out at Town Hall if you ask what you're voting for. The difference is down here in the bottom line in principal and interest. And so what it looks like is that we voted and approved $88 million to spend, and somewhere along the line in the refinancing and all of that, somehow or other we spent another $1.25 million on principal and about another $1 million on interest on capital expenditures. And you could make the case in the world of accounting that what we really are seeing is a 7% increase where 3% of that increase was built into last year's budget that we didn't vote on. That's a little weird. Now, I don't know if this is all true. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing, and I'm asking the question of the Board of Finance, is that really what's going on here?
The Board of Finance put a budget out that had a requested appropriation of $94,185,580. It represented a spending increase of 3.86% over the previous year, over the previous year's budget.
Right, but we've got a communication to the public here saying that we approved the budget for $88 million. Why would that information be put in the public domain?
I do not know. That would be a question for the finance office.
Is she here?
No, she is not.
Did you say that? I'm sorry.
That would be a question for the finance office. They prepare the documents and send them to the newspaper.
But the document's got your name here at the bottom saying
Agreed.
This is good, right?
Agreed.
So theoretically, the Board of Finance is looking at these numbers and telling everybody in the public, these are good numbers. And these are the numbers we're voting on, right?
The adopted budget in 2015-2016 was $90,703,425. Why it says a revised budget of $88,008,456, I don't understand.
Do you see how people could draw the conclusion that we're looking at a $6 million spending increase?
Perhaps.
Okay.
But the approved budget for 2015-2016 by the public was $90,703,000. $645. And that was there. That's in this document.
Right, but this is the legal notice that we voted on.
Right. The estimated expenditure is $90,703,425.
All right, and my last comment has to do with the Efficiency Task Force report of 2010. We discussed that at the previous public hearing as well. There were recommendations in that were made by that task force to the Board of Finance. I think they did a presentation to you guys recommending the consolidation of the departments for finance, recommending, because we now have 2 finance departments, one on the town side and one on the Board of Ed side. They were recommending the consolidation of facility departments. We now have 2 facility departments on the town side and the board side. And they also recommended the consolidation of the technology departments. And there were some concerns expressed about the fact that we have 3 separate entities that are involved in administering the groundskeeping in town, mowing of lawns and things like that, among many other things. And so I am advocating as part of the budget process this year, in the revised budget that may come out, that some of those, some if not all of the recommendations of the Efficiency Task Force be considered by the boards as they meet together, and that perhaps this would be the time to implement some of those consolidations.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to address the board?
My name is Tom Costa. I live at 3191 Durham Road in Guilford, Connecticut. I'm here to ask the boards to really consider deeper cuts than they've made. I'm nervous about doing this, but I think when I'm looking at my taxes, I can not only look at what I'm paying in Guilford, Connecticut, and I fail to see how there's any possibility that, given the situation in Hartford, that at some point or another we're going to see serious tax increases in the next 2 to 4 years. I happen to see a figure that shows that right now Connecticut's actual percentage of revenue income that goes to pay for pension funds, healthcare funds, and debt servicing is 35% of all the revenue that comes into the state. And it's the third highest of any state. That percentage is the third highest of any state in the United States of America. So I feel very strongly that the best place that I can do the best job I can to make sure that my taxes are fair, and that and people in this town taxes are fair, is to look at the total picture and understand that the train is out on the track and it's running over this state. And the only place I can really help control it is what's going on here in Guilford. So I do have some questions, but I'll hold those off until people have made comments if they want to make.
Thank you.
Hello. I don't know what to talk out here. My name is Mary Jo Kestner. I live at 131 Boston Street. I'm one of the... Okay. Hello? Is it this? What is on? This is on. All right. All right. If I hold this, can you hear me? All right. How about that? Hey, okay. All right. So we'll start again. My name is Mary Jo Kestner. I live at 131 Boston Street, and I'm one of the 1,800 people, or plus or minus more, who voted for the budget. And I'm here because I'm very concerned about the cuts that are being contemplated tonight by the Board of Ed and Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen. I know that as a town, we're not going to do things to cut critical services, things that are going to affect our seniors, our fire department, our police services. And so that just makes me think that it's going to affect the things that I love about the town and that support the events that I love. Things like the library, the park and rec, the tree lighting, the summer concerts. And so I wanted to come and say that tonight. And I also, this is a great week. There are so many great weeks in town. But I wanted to bring to you something. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to see the pilgrims around, but this is something that I think is really special. This is Early Guilford Days this week, and so our 4th grade children in the 4 elementary schools have a chance to go visit the different museums that are downtown, and they get a chance to live like colonials. They learn how to hearth cook, they learn how to make, my 4-year-old made this, and I'm a crafty mom, but I have never done anything like this with my son. These are really treasured traditions, and these are things that very dedicated staff and very dedicated volunteers work together to bring to our town. And I'm really concerned that when we start to contemplate cuts, that we are going to lose these things that we work so hard to cobble together. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
David Young, 80 Wolpers Lane. Thought I wasn't going to get up here tonight, but I attended the last meeting, and when the budget failed, I think everybody was surprised. But it was interesting reaction here from the Board of Finance, because the Board of Finance, the people who spoke, very much talked about the fact that the budget had failed, but the reality of what you did is that you didn't basically do anything. If you look at the $300,000 you took out of the budget, that was 1/3 of 1%. So I think you lost the second referendum because, as another gentleman said earlier, you basically insulted the electorate. In a corporate world, if somebody tells you got to reduce your budget, 1/3 of 1% is going to get you thrown out of the room. So I think you need to be serious. I think that most people voted for the high school, and we understand that the bonds are coming due, and so there is an increase due to that. But I think if you need a target, and I think you need a target, in the corporate world, everybody always gives you a target. You ought to think about zero budget increase for everything other than the bonding. And that ought to be your target. And how you get there, how you divide it up between the Board of Ed and the town itself, is up to you, obviously. But, and this time around, the budget only failed, in theory, by 200 votes. But there are, at least by what I was told today, about 720 employees in the town of Guilford that work for the town of Guilford, between the Board of Ed and the town, of which approximately 50% of them live in town. So if 75% of that 50% voted, because they all have a very vested interest in the budget passing, it's called a job, then there were 273 built-in yes votes for the budget, okay? So it really failed by closer to 400 or 500 votes. And you need to think about it, and you need to get serious about some reductions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to address the board?
Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen of the various boards, I want to thank you all for your service to the town and to the town's people. As you may or may not be aware,
Could you give us a name and address for the record, please?
Anthony Cafiro, 462 Granite Road. As you may or may not be aware, the POCD, Plan of Conservation and Development Draft, July 2015, states Guilford's population is aging and is expected to age in place. On page 10, you can see a Christmas tree diagram of the populace changing negatively from age 60 to 64, 65 to 69, 70 to 74, where it trims off. Guilford's tax base may be growing through economic development, the rock pile, et cetera. But the ability of Guilford's retirees to stay in place, if you will, is arguably insolvent. Elderly tax relief programs are not the answer, where taxes are essentially frozen, and as you undoubtedly know, those programs are means tested and have all kinds of qualifiers, and I don't believe include automobiles, which we should not lose track of. Automobiles the tax on automobiles is a very large portion of what people feel in some of these budget arenas. To bring it home, I'll share my own thoughts. I've lived in Guilford for 21 years in the same home, 4-bedroom colonial, unimproved house. Since 2007, the taxes on that same house, again unimproved, have gone up 25%. My 2009 and 2010 Toyotas have gone up 33%. Is that sustainable? I'm proud to live here. I'm very proud to say I'm retired. I don't believe I can stay here. Cuts in services, it's arguable what's important to everybody. My home is on a private road. I have to pave that road. I have to plow that road. I have a well. I have a septic system. I've never had kids. I voted for the school. How can you expect the other 40 or so % of people that live on such private roads in town, absorbing those additional costs that are not in any of these budgets, to stay in place? Is that realistic? I think you have to decide and break it down line by line. Some have said that the referendum for the turf field is an additional burden. I tend to agree. I also realize that that item is not part of this budget process. But do realize that those additional monies have to be paid for in the tax allocations to all of the tax base. So don't lose track of the fact that people are starting to watch very closely that not only does the budget need to be agreed to and passed, but these additional referendum items, in the case of the turf field, approximately another $1 million, may come down to tens, maybe 100 per family, whatever it might be. But I believe that the town is on an unsustainable path. And I urge you to go line by line, department head by department head, and start bringing the budget into line with what's going on in the real world, which is zero, if not cuts to budgets. Again, thank you all for your service.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to address the board?
Joe Petrowski, Valley Shore Drive. Not for anything, this looks like the Super Bowl. They're all here. I'm here again, but this time the landscape has changed. We had a pretty good voter turnout. I kind of disagree with some of the previous speakers about you didn't cut enough the first time around. You cut in proportion to what the turnout was for the vote. It went down by 40 votes. You people didn't know where you were testing the waters. Now, the waters have been muddied, so you've got to try and clear them. Since the last town meeting or referendum, additional information has come out. We need lights at the high school. Everybody is tied up in knots over here how to pay for the lights. They budgeted $250,000 in the budget. The price went up to $370,000. Nobody knows how they're going to pay for it. They're going to bond it, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. Board of Education is showing a $70,000, what we're going to call a surplus. I don't call that a surplus. The fact of the matter is, what they spent is putting our money to good use. We're educating the kids with it. The town, on the other hand, is showing a $1.5 million surplus. That's where I think the problem is. That's where I think we should look. As far as the Board of Ed goes, I think the Board of Finance should reinstate that $150 they took away. Allow them to keep their $70,000 in surplus, and somehow or another find $50,000 to fix those lights. And let that just ride like that. I think what the Board of Finance has to do is look to the town side, because that's where the money is. And those might be the numbers that these people are looking for. $1.5 million. I wouldn't touch the schools. I've been around long enough that these schools have, well, they've come a long ways from where they've been. And I don't want to see them go back to where they were. And, you know, we got kids to educate, let's do it. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Babin. I live at 28 High Street. I agree with the last statement that was made. I think it's very important. We're thinking about priorities, that we think about the schools. We hear a lot about budget items, dollar amounts, bonding, debt, but we should also talk about the children. The schools I've been in town for 23 years. I have 2 kids in high school. I have 1 kid who has graduated from the high school, is now at the University of Connecticut. And I have seen a tremendous growth in the quality of the schools, in the professionalism and how they're run. And I think it's added a lot to the town spirit, pride of people living in town. I think it's made the town more attractive. I think it's brought a lot of people to the town and has led to a lot of people to invest in the town, whether it's in business or in their own homes. I've seen many homes in my neighborhood here near the Green. People invest and take pride and have, I think, increased the overall look and feel of the town. And talking about the children, I think back over 20 years when I was still new in town, and we had a crisis. The budget was voted down. And then it was voted down, and then it was voted down. What to do? My understanding is that the music program was, the music program was eliminated. And if you can remember the year that the Guilford Fair Parade in the early 1990s, that the members of the marching band marched with their instruments silently, because there was no music program. And instead, they had signs protesting the elimination of the music program. We've come a long ways since that. Once you have that in mind, you can no longer be complacent. You can no longer tolerate the elimination of programs that have really added so much to the quality of the lives of our children and of our town. If you go now, over 20 years later, you go to the regional concerts for the South Central Connecticut. You can go to a regional orchestra, and you will see that maybe half of the players in the regional orchestra are from Guilford. Guilford has one of the top programs in music, and Guilford has excellent theater arts. You go to the new high school and see only the best in theater arts. Again, it brings pride to the town and leads people to, I think, come to Guilford and invest in that town. When you go to the Memorial Day Parade and you see the band and you cheer the band, or you cheer the orchestra, then you are saying yes to investing in Guilford. If you're going to say no, then I ask you to turn your back, because in my view, significant cuts to the schools and a no vote is the equivalent of turning your back on the band. And I would ask instead that you do not do that. And I would appreciate then that we take those priorities into mind in crafting the new budget and when people go to the polls and vote next time. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Good evening. My name is Chris Balistraci. I live at 421 Willow Road. I'm speaking here as a Guilford property owner and taxpayer, as a father of 2 Guilford students, one who is still in the school system, one who is now in college, as a business person of Guilford, and as a Guilford High School coach of the state championship fencing team, and also as a lifelong Guilford resident. I feel it's very important to be concerned for all our residents, from our children in our school system to our seniors who have lived here all their lives and want to continue to live here in Guilford, to the more recent residents who have moved here for various positive reasons. Many people want to move here because of the great benefits that Guilford has to offer. Its great public beaches and coastal areas, its proximity to job centers like New Haven and New London and even New York, and its accessibility to I-95 and the Metro North train station. I believe that we have to work in a bipartisan way to come up with real solutions to the issues that people have raised for this budget process. We've rejected the budget twice, but I feel strongly that we need to accept this third budget. And I think we need to work together, both from the administration standpoint and as citizens and as business people, to increase the tax base so that we are increasing the taxes that we can collect instead of trying to work with only what we have. We have a great town. We have a AAA bond rating. We should be proud of that. And people have to realize that several things like the education costs, 85% of the education budget is contractual that have been worked out years ago and that we just have no control over. So I urge all the elected officials to work in a bipartisan way, in a positive way, for all the people of Guilford. And I urge all of us as voters to pass this next budget and work together to find more revenue sources, encourage business to Guilford so that we can increase the tax base, and then we wouldn't have these difficult decisions. Thank you.
Mark Sejourne, 9 Lantern Hill Lane. I'll keep it brief. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight. I recognize that I don't pay taxes, so many of the services being discussed aren't relevant to me, but the services provided by the Guilford Public Schools are quite relevant, and I serve as a student representative to the Board of Education, so I've been in consistent communication with both the administration, both the administration of our schools as well as the student body of our schools. And I've been able to see the difference that our schools have made, and I think an example of our schools in the community is West Side Story, the theatrical production put up this spring by Guilford High School. And it was kind of the talk of the town for quite a bit. There were letters to the editor. It was all over the Guilford Facebook page, Simply Guilford. And so I think it's important, if I can use myself to put a face to the student body of Guilford, I think that that is a great example of all the schools are able to do for us. And it's important to recognize that something like that, like we can all appreciate it, and it's this money that goes toward that. So I'd encourage you not to make any further cuts to the Board of Education for that reason and for many others. Thank you.
Anyone else? Going once, going twice. Closed. Thank you for the public input. As I indicated earlier now, those who might want to make comments or Ken?
Well, as a member of this board for a number of years, I certainly,
You have to speak up.
as a member of this board for a number of years, I take exception to any accusations, not only from myself, but from my colleagues, of treating these budgets in a not non-serious way, or with cowardice, or with arrogance. Indeed, I think we could say that we are very respectful of the will of the people, and we respect the vote as it came down the first time, whether it would have been 5 votes or 14% of the votes. We respected the rejection the second time. There were more voters and it went down by 205 votes. It wouldn't hurt to just review the process very, very briefly of how these budgets were crafted from the point of view of our Board of Finance. We became involved in these budgets as early as mid-October. We were more actively involved through December with subcommittee meetings with the Board of Education and in the workshop meetings with the town. These meetings were open, they were thorough, they were very, very carefully addressed by the Board of Selectmen, and we were left with the feeling that what was delivered to us was a reasonable budget on both the town and the school side. Actually, there is something that got in the way of this, and that's the high school. And no one has mentioned yet that it's the debt service that is fueling these increases. And it's not something that we can walk away from. 65% of the voters of this town came out for the school referendum and approved it. That's a pretty healthy majority. And when you look at the cuts, even the much maligned $300,000 in cuts, they reduced the town and the school budgets to a combined increase of 1.81%. That's the operating budget. Now, if you add to that the debt service, you're then getting up to a larger number. There's been an awful lot of misinformation bandied around town regarding what is or is not in those budgets. To just blandly call it a 5% increase is incorrect. To somehow assume that somewhere buried within those numbers is the artificial turf is not correct. That is outside of the taxing. To imply that the number I wrote down here was 720 employees, and to consider that the town and the schools have just been hiring in a frenzy is absolutely wrong. The town has reduced its employees by I think a total of 11 full-time employees, and I think the schools have lowered the number of teachers, the most expensive support we have. There have been a reduction of at least 9 teachers and a large number of paraprofessionals. Do we respect the will of the voters beyond those points? Do we just arrogantly or out of cowardice come back at you and tell you, no, we're just going to give you the same budget? I don't believe that we should. I believe that we should reach down into the schools and the town and provide additional cuts. And how deep those cuts can be and how painful those cuts will be is something we all have to absorb. I would like to address a man who is seems to be in my demographic. I would say that we're all advancing through the demographic in this town, and we all, I don't know of anyone who isn't, but that would be a good bonus. Come to Guilford to live forever. But we do, and I think the forum is a good place to begin this. We should hear from the 2 other elected boards about where they would suggest going beyond this point. But I do want to conclude my remarks by commenting on the respect I have for the 2 boards. We've been on the inside of these meetings, and I respect the process, and I think we have a wonderful town, and I think we're all approaching this with a careful and thoughtful manner.
Anyone else want to? Cindy?
Sure. Chairman Hovey, I wasn't sure what the format of the meeting was, so I prepared sort of some comments and statement. For most of you that have been serving for the last 6 years, which probably more than 50% of us, this will be familiar to you because I've communicated this. As we're all acutely aware, we continue to face challenging economic times, not only within our town and the state, but across the country. The 2 failed budget referendums are indicative of the fact that the citizens have spoken and they're not desirous of us continuing in the manner that we have in terms of budgeting. Although much has been accomplished over the past few years on both the town and Board of Ed budgets, much more needs to be done to continue to improve and maintain the fiscal health and quality of our town. As all of you should know, we're looking at a $1.5 million surplus in this year's budget. Demonstrating to the voters that we heard them, I recommend giving back the $1.5 million surplus this year by reducing the budget next year going forward by 1.5. We've had similar surpluses over the last 2 years. In fact, 2015, we had $1.2 million surplus, 2014, 1.3, and it's for this and other reasons that I have voted against the budgets the last few years, because I feel that we're veering from the direction that we need to go in to look for the solid fiscal health of the town. I've also asked Sheila for the information, which I just got earlier this evening, and I'll be willing to pass it all to you about where the surpluses have shown over the last couple of years. Then, over the course of the next year, we need to come back to the voters with a solid fiscal plan as to how we're going to reduce the cost to run the town and maintain essential services. In putting together a solid fiscal plan, we need to consider consolidating both town and Board of Ed departments, as well as sharing services with other towns to further consolidate. Again, we do this in a few areas like the transfer station. As most of you will recall, I've requested previously that we look into this. Our economic times have and will continue to be challenging as Connecticut has not fully recovered from the 2008 recession. Jobs are and will continue to move out of the state. Now they're talking about Aetna leaving. There's a fiscal crisis in the state level with continued running deficits that have now hit our town budgets and will continue to do so, and there's no relief in sight, and economists are predicting in the next 3 years we're looking at another recession. In 2010, again in 12, again in 14, I've communicated this to my fellow board members, but it's fallen on deaf ears. I have and am requesting the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and Board of Education work together over the next year to come up with this plan by forming a smaller committee comprised of 2 members of each board. That we work together to look at combining resources similar to what the Efficiency Task Force report called for in 2010. For example, combining the finance, facilities, and technology departments of both the town and Board of Ed side. The cost savings and efficiencies that can be created by consolidating these departments can be significant, easily $250 or more per year, as we realize benefit savings as well, while we continue to maintain the services that touch our citizens, our teachers, our police officers, our firemen, and the like. We will also achieve administrative efficiencies that we've experienced by consolidating town departments. We also need to actively look to consolidate other services with other towns. We had an opportunity to consolidate our animal control with Branford. In 2002, the first selectman and I met with the director of the Branford facility, and they were excited about the opportunity to consolidate it with us. They're still open to that opportunity as well. I'm also formally calling for us to encompass a 20-year capital plan. We have a 5-year plan on the town side. I believe on the Board of Ed has a similar one, but we need to put a comprehensive plan together town-wide. In doing so, we'll be in a better position as this board today and in boards in the future to make the long-term fiscal decisions about the health of the town, where we prioritize the capital expenditures. Other towns have done it. Look at West Hartford, for example. They actually have it on their website. I believe more voters will support not only this budget, but future budgets if we show them that we have a plan in place. And again, I've repeated this, and I'm going to send an email out to all of you tonight with these comments to follow up. So thank you.
Can I make a comment? Let's go to the board. Let's try to keep this round robin if we can.
Okay.
You'll be next, though.
Okay.
I just want to comment a little bit on capital. You know, as mentioned, a large part of this, the tax increase that we're looking at is the bonding on the high school. When we looked at this, you know, a long time ago, I guess not that long ago, but 6 or 7 years ago, there was a very thorough analysis about what the financial impact would be to renovating the existing high school at that time versus building new. And to be honest, really, if you looked at our debt in the town, debt to capita, we were very, very low in the state. We had underinvested in our infrastructure. On the Board of Ed side, we've really tried to catch up on that. The new high school is part of that. But one of the criticisms that came along when we were facing infrastructure issues was that we didn't maintain our facilities. During my time on the Board of Ed, we've substantially increased the capital portion of the operating budget. In fact, it's gone up about $100,000 each year to about $500,000 this year. And that's money that doesn't come out of bonds. It's used to repair the cement that therefore prevents the water from getting in and freezing and cracking the wall. And unfortunately, when you're on the Board of Education and the budgets are cut, you're faced with the immediate concern of cutting services, programs, teachers, things that directly impact the kids, versus cutting things like capital. So I'm not suggesting that we totally gut that item, but that's the thing that, when we don't pass budgets, we cut into our ability to maintain the capital that we have. And then we end up in the problem years down where we have to, invest more than we might have had we done preventative maintenance. So I think we've actually really tried to catch up on the capital, and that has been reflected in some increases because we had really relatively underinvested in that for many years. So I actually am very proud of where we are with our facilities right now, and with the operations that are going on inside those facilities. So, the voters have spoken, we have to listen to that, and I'll leave it up to the Board of Finance in terms of how much they cut. But I want people to understand that, when we do vote this, if we do vote this third budget down, part of the thing we're going to have to cut is probably the capital investment that's going to come around to get us at some other point. You can't, continually underinvest in capital over time.
Peter?
I'm going to make a very brief comment. I supported the initial budget and also when we had the revised budget. I think the Board of Ed, Board of Selectmen and so forth, they were very prudent, very judicious in terms of how the budgets were put together. The increase of 1.99% was the lowest Board of Ed increase in 5 years. I think they worked very hard at it, and same with the town. The budget was within reason. Obviously, the big increase had to do with the debt services. I am surprised that everyone is surprised that taxes went up. Now we're, we knew that the high school is going to cost us something, and that's what we're paying for. Now, here's the thing. I hear all these things about cutting this, cutting that. First of all, athleticism is something that should never be considered to be cut. The lights, the turf, and so forth, because that is part of the education. Everyone should take music, math, and other courses, but athletics is part of the education. Those services, like the library, Jacob's Beach, basically the golf course and so forth, those are services for people that live here. So, okay, the town voted to no for the budget 2 times, right? So what is the elephant in the room that's creating this increase? Basically, if you look in terms of the benefits and the salaries for Board of Ed, 81% of it, 81% of the budget is going to those 2 categories. So, okay, if the town is basically going to, say no to the budget, it's easy to resolve the issue. You increase class sizes. Is that what the town wants? You could cut the budget very quickly by increasing the class sizes. You can also, there's part of it is tied up in contractual negotiations with the unions, but we can also demand that people don't work 35 hours, but let's go to a 40-hour work week. We can also say, why are we paying benefits, full benefits, for someone that works 25 hours? I mean, these are issues that basically we should consider. And I voted for the budget the first time. I voted for the budget for the second time. I don't really see where the town could cut or the Board of Ed could cut unless basically they increase the class sizes. Because the others cuts would be basically cuts in services for the community. And I don't think we really want to do that. I think Jacob Beach belongs to all of us. The golf, course belongs to all of us. And the library is a fantastic place to go. And the Park and Rec does a super job. So I don't see where they could cut personally.
Thank you, Peter. Anyone? Try to keep this. Joe?
I guess I'll take this opportunity to say my piece here. The first referendum went down 40 people. And, can everybody hear me? I want to make sure you hear me. Okay? The first referendum went down because of 40 votes, and we all thought, mistakenly, that that was turnout, and perhaps it was. So the Board of Finance tweaked the budget by reducing it $300,000. The second referendum went down by 212 votes. Now, to me, that's a mandate. And I'm on the side of making serious cuts. Because I don't want to go to a fourth referendum. I don't want to be here again in another month. I have met with my chiefs and my department heads. And as good as a budget as I thought we had put together, we can do better. And we will cut back where we can at the direction of the Board of Finance. And we will cut all non-essential items. But I will pledge to the citizens of this town that we will not put anyone in danger, any property at risk. We will answer the call when the call comes in. We are fiscally responsible. We are professionals. We will do our jobs. But I'm going to take you back in time. When I hear that we need plans, we started our plans 5 years ago. And I'm not going to have anybody politicize this process. 5, 6 years ago, we decided, because we had to, that we had to deal with our bargaining units. Our union contracts were not in line with economic conditions. As good as our employees are, and they're fantastic, they're wonderful employees, but their rate of pay increases were too high for Guilford and for economic times back in 2010. 4% and 5% rate increases were not sustainable. No one who belongs to a bargaining unit in the town of Guilford is getting close to a 3% increase. That's planning. We also looked at what our employees are contributing to their health insurance. Under Obamacare, you may like it, hate it, I don't care. It's become too expensive. Our employees are now contributing with more, in some cases up to 20%. Now, I know all of you in the private sector say, well, that's nothing. They were contributing half of that 5 years ago. That's planning. Let me talk about pension. Every employee 6 years ago was covered by a traditional pension plan. Very, very expensive for the town of Guilford. That no longer exists. Every new hire whose contract has come under negotiations is now covered under 401A, a defined contribution plan. That went from the town contributing anywhere from 25, 30% to their pension plan to now 8%. That's planning. Can I continue? Thank you. Workers' comp. 6 years ago, we had unlimited workers' comp benefits. What does that mean? If you were a town employee and you went out on workers' comp, the town made you whole for as long as you went out on workers' comp. We paid the tab, tax-free. There was one employee in the Public Works Department that was paid for 2.5 years out of the town's pocket, tax-free. That no longer exists. In some departments, the limit is 6 months. In other departments, it's 3. That's planning. That's good financial planning. That's been all accomplished under collective bargaining. We did not have to go the expense of arbitration. So when I hear the town has not done enough to keep your taxes low, that makes me a little bit angry. And I have a right to be, because this board has done, Board of Finance support, I think has done a pretty good job. And that also goes for the emergency services. We have great emergency services. We have the best police and fire in the state. None better. And they agreed to these conditions. That was a complete culture change. When I meet with my colleagues from the other towns, I'm congratulated because we were able to get these agreements. That's good management. Able to build a new Guilford High School, which I think was mentioned, 65% of the voters who went to the polls supported. And you know what upsets me? We did an analysis past weekend. 1,600 people who voted for that high school did not vote in the last 2 referendums. Thank you. Thanks for your support on that, okay? Economic development, I think a gentleman spoke about that. We need more economic development. This year, the 2015 grand list, which is what we're working with, because of good economic development and the fine work of the EDC and Brian McClone, our EDC coordinator, the grand list grew by $24 million, where other towns, the grand lists are shrinking. That's good planning and good management. We started a 5-year capital plan 6 years ago. Each year, the current year drops off, a new year goes on. And we were able to provide our public works, our park and rec, and our other departments, police and fire, with new equipment, which they hadn't gotten in some cases 25 years, so they can service you better. So during the snowstorm, we're not having breakdowns. This town has gone through, in the last 6 years, 5 FEMA incidents. We've gone through Superstorm Sandy, hurricanes, blizzards, and our people, your employees, have been able to get this town up and running in record time during snowstorms, blizzards, blackouts. We were there for you. And I'm willing, to the Board of Finance, I'm willing to accept any cuts you give me, and we will get this town up and running in any emergency. I guarantee that. But I think the voters deserve these cuts. And I want to say something else. Talk about management. We've grown that fund balance, and we had to grow the fund balance And we did it through surpluses. Yes, surpluses are not bad. If we had deficits, you'd probably want to hang me on the town green because I was wasting your money. And the surpluses were the results of good management by, not me, by our department heads. Police, fire, public works, park and rec, you name it. They do not waste your money. I want to read something from the credit agencies, okay? This is from Standard & Poor's. We view the town's management as strong with good financial policies and practices. The town maintains a formal 5-year capital improvement plan that is updated annually, includes funding sources, and presented to the Board of Selectmen annually. Further, it maintains its good own formalized investment policies and reports holdings to the Selectmen monthly. The town follows the state debt management policies. Guilford has also adopted a formal unassigned fund balance policy to maintain reserves 5 to 10% of general fund reserve balance, currently within acceptable range. These are from the professionals who rate our towns and other municipalities. We are currently in the 7% range. We're not overtaxing. Our fund balance is within the range that is acceptable. Moody's. The town's financial position will remain stable given the town's conservative financial management practices, which is supported by a formal fund balance policy. The town has grown general fund reserve for 5 consecutive years, with another surplus anticipated for the current fiscal year. Available fund balance levels at 8.9% of reserve in fiscal 2015 are, however, below the median of 13.9% of similarly rated Connecticut municipalities. We're not overtaxing. Both of these are dated March 2016. So, Mr. Chairman, I reiterate, we have professional managers. We have the best police chiefs and fire chiefs in the state. I have met with them. We all agree. Whatever this board decides to cut, we will work with. But I do say that the taxpayers deserve a better cut than we had the first go-round. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else, Board of Ed say?
I think just briefly, Mr. Hoy, I'm going to say something in a slightly different way that I've said before, but I really do feel very strongly about. And that is, we've talked a lot this evening about costs on all sides, and I think a couple of speakers have alluded to the other side of the ledger, if you will, the benefit side, because fundamentally when we do choose to spend a dollar, the theory is that the benefit that we're getting back from spending that dollar is actually worth a dollar, right? I think that's the way we make our decisions around our house. That's the way that we make our decisions in business. That's what we try very hard to do on the Board of Education. On the town side, I think it's very hard to measure in some respects because all towns are different. All towns have different number of roads. All towns have different police departments, fire departments, and so forth. But I think one of the dangers that we have in government generally is that we tend to take snapshots, and we try to we wind up making decisions on a month-to-month basis or a year-to-year basis, and that's really not the way generally businesses or governments really ought to run. We, I think, need to have an honest assessment about where we are and how efficient we are and how productive the schools are for the investment that the community has made in them. And I think it was mentioned that one of the reasons that Guilford is attractive right now is undeniably the public school system. A house in Guilford, if it is moved to a town 2 or 3 towns away, is worth $150,000 less. That's just a fact. Now, it's true that that's only happens if you sell your house, and I get that, and I understand that. On the other hand, we worked, all of us, Mr. Mazza, myself, you, Mr. Hoy, we worked very hard on the senior tax freeze, and it was mentioned about the seniors staying in town. Well, that's what the point of the freeze was. That wasn't an accident. That didn't just happen. That was something that we counted on, and because we wanted to have our population age in place. We knew that. That was a priority for us, and that program has worked. I hope it will continue to work, and people will support it. But back to the schools. Back about 10 years ago, probably some of you are familiar with an outfit, a think tank called the Yankee Institute. And the Yankee Institute is generally not particularly pro-government spending. And they wanted to do a study that showed how more per-student spending doesn't necessarily lead to higher per-student achievement. They wanted to compare CMT and CAP scores with how much towns were spending per student. And Guilford actually rated a mention in that study, if you'll remember. At that time, Guilford was described as, by the Yankee Institute, as efficient, in that our scores were higher than you would expect for our per-student costs. Well, we actually have some better data on that now, and this is data that is objective. This is data that we don't create. This is data that allows us to compare with our investment per student in Guilford with what actually we are getting for that in objective terms. So if you will permit me, I'd like to pass out for your consideration some data from last summer that was in the Hartford Current regarding per student spending. It's a 5-page document. You're going to have to go to the 3rd page to find Guilford because we are right in the middle. Just about average for per student spending in the state of Connecticut. However, earlier this year, the state of Connecticut has adopted a new performance and accountability set of standards called the Next Generation Accountability. It takes into account test scores. It takes into account many other criteria. There were 83 schools in the entire state of Connecticut out of, I don't know, 700, some number of hundreds, that were 83 schools were considered to be schools of distinction. 4 of those schools are in the town of Guilford. Guilford High School is a school of distinction in 2 separate areas. Speaking of Guilford High School, the state of Connecticut ranked all of the high schools in the state of Connecticut on performance, on this new performance criteria. The first high school in the state of Connecticut was New Canaan. Outstanding school, New Canaan High School. The second high school in the state of Connecticut under the State Department of Education's new performance criteria was Guilford High School, second in the entire state of Connecticut. The third piece of data that I'd like you to consider as you are moving forward is what I promised I was going to do a couple of minutes ago, and that is to talk about performance in relation to expenditures. The Guilford School District, out of all of the school districts in the state of Connecticut, is ranked 6th on the state's new accountability performance survey. New Canaan, again, is number 1. New Canaan spends $19,904 per student. Darien is number 2. $18,377 per student. Westport is number 3, $20,446 per student. Madison, outstanding neighboring district, $15,846. Weston, 5th, $21,291 per student. Just in back of Weston is the town of Guilford Public Schools at $16,033 per student, which is $5,000 less per student than the town of Weston. The average of the top 10 schools, school districts in the state of Connecticut on the state's performance criteria is $18,000 $292 per student. We are less than, we are more than $2,200 per student less than the average. We are right with Madison, Simsbury, and Avon in being outliers from the rest of these per student spending in the top 10. So there are going to, I think the point of this is, I think it's important as we move forward, and we do look, we respect this board, we understand that there are going to be changes, we get that. We understand that the budget was not supported twice, we understand and we respect that. We understand there are going to be some changes, we respect that. However, it is vital that we make an honest assessment about where we are and act and accept that we have been efficient for the last 10 years. We have got average per student spending. Our performance is very much above where our demographic data alone would suggest it ought to be. We are in a great place in our district right now. We will be able to, I'm sure, move forward with this board's proposed budget, regardless of what it is, but we need to keep in mind where we are.
Thank you. Mike?
I don't know why exactly that I decided to go after Bill. Always a tough act to follow. On May 17th, when the budget went down, I entered a fray called Simply Guilford on Facebook. A few of you I may know through that. I don't know who you are. I maybe know your names much better than I know faces, but I am sure there's probably a few of you out there. It was very difficult for me to respond to a lot of the issues because it was a flurry. I think I counted something along the lines of 350 to 400 comments. And I actually was questioning while I was away for a few days whether or not I really made a mistake doing that. And the more I responded or tried to get involved with some of the discussions and maybe quelch some of the issues or maybe bring some, whether it's truth or some fact, I kept on getting a lot of likes and I kept on getting a lot of good comments that I was doing the right thing and keep it up. So I've done that. So I found a new niche for me on the Board of Finance. It's like the social media coordinator. I did not expect to do that, but I hope it was helpful. That being said, I do have quite a few questions that have come to me both in email as well as commentary that I went through with a fine-tooth comb last night and the last few days. But I know we could be here all night with me asking questions and all this. So I want to just throw a couple of numbers out there that we've all talked about the debt service and what's driving this. And there's some things that when you're doing analysis on these budgets, when I was up until some ungodly hour last night crunching numbers and looking at it, I decided to take kind of an approach at where the cuts would be. Not line item by line item, but based on what was heard and what we could do and what was fair. So I looked at, on both the town side and the Board of Ed side, I looked at what we would do if we took the budgets and went level on everything except for, on the Board of Ed side, salaries and employee benefits, which are already negotiated. By the way, they're being renegotiated this summer. One of my questions would be about those contract negotiations, hiring a consultant to do it as opposed to Board of Ed and volunteers. That was a question that came out. $1.005 million of a $1.147 million increase in the Board of Ed is exactly that. It's salaries and benefits. That was the first budget. We cut $150. That leaves the fact that the Board of Ed now has to find $7,700 below the salary benefits that are already set. It's not that much. So you start looking at, okay, well, let's cut, whether it's minimal, maximum, it doesn't matter, okay, whatever everybody thinks a minor cut is. To the Board of Ed, I don't think there's a lot of minor cuts left. But I have some ideas that are about $150,000. Guess where that is? Exactly where Mr. Moore said not to go, and we shouldn't go. It's really capital related, and I'm not going to tell you what they are yet, because I don't want to put the Board of Ed on a spot like that. But could there be 150? Sure. That brings their budget increase from 1.99 to 1.47. That's the Board of Ed. Let's go to the town. Same exact issue, but we're going to assume no increase in the budgets, in the expenses, no increase in expenses except for, so everything stays level except for revaluation, which we have to build over a period of years, otherwise we get hit all at once. Employee benefits, which includes reserve for personnel, which we have to plan for the negotiations of contracts. Insurance, register our voters because they're going to need every bit next year. Police, fire, and library and communications, because neither one of those went up or were level. They both dropped. So there's no sense in cutting them. And yes, I went to engineering and public works, much to probably the first selectman's disdain, but yeah, I cut there too. And I was able to get maybe about $300,000. That brings the Board of Selectmen budget from 1.96, make sure I have my number right, but basically it gets to 0.87%. You combine the Board of Ed and you combine the Board of Selectmen, and you're looking at what appears to be a 1.27% increase in operating budget. And we talked about debt service. I'm not going to go through debt service, but what does that do? That brings the expenditure increase to 3.34. How many of you are saying, oh my gosh, 3.34 expenditures, I can't believe it. How could they do that? You take the debt service out, your mill rate has just gone down a lot, okay? You've got a tax decrease. I want to address two other things. One, the zero tax increase. Simply Guilford, they saw this, and I'm gonna say it again, okay? And I'm gonna try to paraphrase, but with the high school debt increase, this year, the biggest year, it's really gonna have to be $1.5 million that are cut at this point. And that's if the Board of Ed came in at zero, because they can't come in less than zero based on legalities, which there are some exceptions, including enrollment. But in the last 2 years, last year and this year, there has been really no drop in enrollment, folks. Maybe in the last few years before that, but we don't see it this year trending that way, and we didn't see it last year. 11 students does not constitute a huge decline in enrollment. So if that is the case, based on what I just said, 400,000, or let's say 450,000 from both boards, let's take out what appears to be another $1.1 million. Let's take 2/3 from the Board of Ed. Let's take 1/3 from the Board of Selectmen. Where do you go? You're already at a point where you're level funding on everything from last year except for negotiated contracts. So you want to say, hey, you should be better on the negotiated contracts, fine. I think the first selectman has made a point that that is happening as best as we can do, and I'm sure the superintendent would love to talk about that as well and what they're doing, but that's not something that could hit this budget. I want to thank you for bringing up the 1,600 votes, because I've been saying all along, boy, it seems like we turned our back on the high school. I know members of this board, of all 3 boards, were involved in that high school project and getting it passed. 1,600 people who voted for the high school didn't vote for these budgets. That makes me ashamed to be a resident. I can't understand how that could happen. You turned your back on the high school. You turned your back on the students. Not the people maybe in this room. I'm sure you all voted, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But that, to me, is telling. I'm willing to make cuts, but you have to know what a 0% increase is. We talk about draconian. You will lose band. you will lose a lot of things that you have come to care about. So I just wanted to put some numbers to it to let you know these boards did a hell of a job, and we've seen it since October. We'll do it again, but you better get the word out to get out and vote, and you better get those high school voters out. That's all.
Dr. Myers.
Chairman, before I went to medical school, I flirted with the idea of being a historian. And that, prompted by Mr. Babin's comments about the music program that was cut 10 years ago, or 25 years ago, prompted me to look back at what happened in those days. The band program was cut only at the end. Prior to that, class size was increased, teachers were let go. Maintenance was cut. Many of the buildings deteriorated. Supplies were cut. When I got on the Board of Education 10 years ago, our kids in the high school were using IBM 350s, I think it was. They were antiques then. They belonged in a museum, not in a classroom. It took us 10 years to recover from those severe cuts early in the 90s. Fortunately, the music program came back the next year. But the supplies, the teachers, the maintenance lagged far behind, so that when we got on the board, we had cautiously the need to raise our expenses just to catch up to where we should have been in terms of supplies and especially in preventive maintenance. And I think we're there now. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to go back to the 90s. You know, we're beyond that. Yes, we need to cut. But if we go back to what we did back in the early 90s, we're in trouble. And who's going to suffer? It's the kids, not us.
Charlie.
During our last budget hearing, I was okay with moderate cuts because there was only 40 voters. We almost doubled the turnout, but the no vote went up 5 times. That's a clear message. I mean, to me, that is an absolute clear message that moderate cuts aren't going to cut it. There is a public anger out there. I don't agree with it. I don't like it. I don't think it's right. It's poor management, but it is where we are. It is where we are in my mind. Everybody I've talked to since, and I've sought people out, people that, you know, both parties, for and against. I've probably been a lurker on some of the Facebook things, and you can see some of the just random statements getting flung out. I mean, they were blaming the dog park for the budget. I mean, it really became, there's a lot of anger out there right now. And that's why, to both Cindy's and Joe's point, I mean, we have to make cuts this time. I mean, I will not support a 0% increase because in my mind, that's absolutely reckless. But I do believe this has to be a substantial cut. And to Mr. Boss's point, I mean, I remember when I owned a business, you know, I learned the lesson very early. It's easy to fire people. Try to get the skilled people back. Try to Dr. Meyer's point. I mean, how do you get back there? I mean, we are going to take the hit. This is what the public wants today, in my mind. I mean, you know, whether people don't want this town to go forward as it has, or can't afford it, or whatever the reason, this is where we are. We have gotten a clear message. I don't like it, I don't agree with it, but I think it's necessary. I don't want to be going through the summer having, you know, sending out last year's tax bills and trying to figure out what we're doing. To Cindy's point, yes, you know, we've done a lot of things, but there's always more you can do. I mean, you know, we've tried to do some of the things, and there's new things that will come up. And the planning, you know, that's a necessary part of professional management or serious responsibility to the voters. But the other part of serious responsibility to the voters is responding to what they say. And to me, you know, when we got the vote out like we said we had to do, and 5 times as many people said no. That's a mandate.
You mentioned you, Mr. Chairman, mentioned at the last public hearing that you corrected me actually and said the number was 40 years, not 24 years.
I think that was Lou.
That was, no, I think it was you. You said that we've had 40 years of 3.5% expenditure increases. And my comment, generally speaking, I hear and I agree with what Mr. Ailes has said, what Dr. Moore has said, basically mostly everything that's been said tonight. The problem that I believe we face is that 3.5%, and which a lot of people have asked, what is there a cap at some point? The 3.5% is not sustainable. And one of the ways is to look at the revenue side, which I don't completely disagree with, but to put it in perspective, if we grow at 3.5% a year and we are lucky enough to get 1.5% back in through development, meaning that we're growing at 2% a year, at 2% a year, our mill rate is still over 40 in 10 years. And you're not going to be able to pick up your house and move it to the next town and get $150,000 more when your mill rate is pushing 40. On top of that, expecting to get 1.5% through development is ridiculous. To put it in perspective, we would have to have 2 new rock piles every year, actually closer to 3, but 2 and change every single year to get that 1.5%. So it's unrealistic unless you want us to look like the Miracle Mile in Orange or Milford. We don't even have the real estate to do that if we wanted to do it, but it certainly would change the character of the town and not for the better, in my opinion. So I don't believe that a 3.5% increase is sustainable because you are looking at mill rates well north of 40. The bigger task at hand, and I don't believe that we should solve this budget problem that we have by dipping into our surplus fund account, because we really haven't addressed the problem if we go raiding the piggy bank to pay for our expenses this year. The problem is exactly that. It's our expenses. Now, there are people in town who can afford to or who are willing to put up with a 3.5% increase year in and year out. There's no doubt about that. However, there are also a lot of people in town that absolutely cannot and ultimately are forced to leave town because they can't afford to stay here. And some people don't have a problem with that, and they argue that that's just the way it is. And that is. It happens all over. It happens all over the state of Connecticut. It's unfortunate, but it is happening. But nonetheless, their vote still counts. So I think when we sit down here, what I was hoping to see happen and what I think a lot of the nay people are looking for is more than just a number in the budget cut. They're looking for a willingness to try to change the process. And based on the rhetoric that I've heard here thus far this evening, I frankly don't really see it. I hear things that we have contractual obligations and maybe we can work better at that. I hear that we're going to have to lose our music programs and our class sizes are going to increase. I think the solution is for everybody to put on their thinking hat. I'm not the Board of Ed expert. You all have significantly more time invested in the process and have a lot more training in the matter. But you should sit down with a group of people and yourselves and with the taxpayers and figure out a way to cut our costs. The reality is our student enrollment is down 600 in the past 10 years, and our budget is up significantly. Our cost per student is high. Just because we fall in the average in the state doesn't necessarily make it okay, because other towns in the state are going through the same thing. So we have to figure out a new approach. We have to figure out a way to increase productivity. And I don't have all the answers. I can sit here and come up with numbers. What Mr. Ailes said is absolutely accurate, but cuts are painful. But I don't agree with the theory that just because we make a cut, we have to have reduced services. We did have $1.5 million surplus last year, which means we could have budgeted $1.5 million less and gotten the same services that we got. So just looking me in the eye and telling me that you cut the budget, that I'm going to increase your class size or I'm not going to plow your driveway, I don't think that's the right response. I think the right response is for everybody to figure out a way to get it done. And it's not easy, and it may mean some job cuts, It may mean some increased productivity in some departments. But until we've shown people that we've looked at it and that we've considered it and quantified the potential savings and quantified the loss in services that would ensue, I don't think we've done our job. So hopefully, and you can't really do it in a day. So I think all we can do for the voters is to come to some sort of agreement on a number, and if you want to get the nay vote, to vote yes, I think you have to put forth a plan that indicates a willingness to look into some of the structural issues that I think we have. Having, you may be able, Mr. Ailes did a great job of pitching the yay vote, so, and it sounds a lot like business as usual. So, you might get those 1,600 people to the polls and you can pass anything you put forth. But I think if you try that, you are doing a disservice to those that voted no.
Anybody else on the Board of Ed side?
I think I would like to just speak for a moment to process. Mr. McKenzie just alluded to or spoke directly about the Board of Education making decisions with the taxpayer involvement. And I guess this is really a plea, and I suppose at the moment I'm making the plea to the wrong group of people because they're sitting in front of us. We have a public forum or a public comment part of our Board of Education meeting every single month. And we start talking publicly about the budget in October, and we have 2 nights at the end of January every year where we invite the entire public, not just parents, but the entire public to come to us. What do you think of the budget we're talking about? What do you think of the things we're putting forward? What are the things you're interested in seeing happen? What are the things you're interested in having us do as a Board of Education for the students or for the town? One of the things I have not been on Simply Guilford very often, but as you can imagine, as budgets went down once and then twice, I was paying a little more attention. And one of the comments was, well, if they're not going to do what we expect, then we're going to vote it down. If you don't tell us what you expect, then that's kind of a comment that's not very helpful after the fact. And one of the things that can happen if people are involved in the process earlier is that suggestions that you may have can be not only considered by us, but then we can explain, for instance, why some of the suggestions may or may not work, and then can engage in a dialogue with our public. So it's really just a plea. We are here to represent you. We cannot do that if you don't talk to us. And we do start this process on the town side and on the Board of Education side 6, 7, 8 months before we're actually voting. So please come. Please get involved. I realize coming to a meeting every month is probably a huge time commitment. Then at least come to the public forums on the budget in January, so that we're not sitting after 2 downed votes trying to figure out where to cut, knowing that cuts we make are going to make some people happy and some people very unhappy, but can at least do so with a little more information about what the town is hoping for, what our citizens, the citizens we're here to represent, are hoping to see. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. I don't know, do we have a form? Are we going to, I'd like to ask Dr. Freeman a question.
Let's let people get statements out first, and then we'll do that. Is that fair? Lou?
Okay, Matt, thank you. I'm going to pick up right where Dr. Balistraci led into, which is people should not be afraid to speak up. You're not hurting our feelings. We are here to serve the town, public servants, okay? It's not a problem. We plead for people to come to our meetings, okay? We get dozens, if not hundreds of emails a day from all sorts of folks. Microscopic, only around the budget season. Occasionally you get some from people who have concerns about what's going on, okay? We're here to be responsive to the needs of the entire community. Now, I don't want to repeat myself, but I mean, I view this process as balancing those three stakeholders. I've said this before. You know, we are responsive to the taxpayers, and we need to be, and after 2 failed budget referendums, we are even more acutely responsive, you know, focused on that. But that doesn't mean we weren't paying attention to that. If you get too far out of whack, that plate starts to get off that center point, you're going to know it, and fast. So the minute you ignore the taxpayers, okay, they're going to hit the ground and they're going to let you know. The minute you cut services too far, those folks are going to let you know. And you abuse your employees and they leave, you're going to spend years solving that problem, as everybody said already. So please, participate in the process. We're here to be responsive to that, and we hope that can result in a dialogue. We hope it's reciprocal. We hope we're saying things that make sense, and if they don't make sense, people can come and point out what they think is important, you know, in a way that's constructive. That's an important part of the process. I must say, I am not particularly interested trying to manage the financial affairs of the town of Guilford of being lumped in immediately with the state of Connecticut. I mean, there are problems up there. We get it. It's not lost on me that that is another pressure point for people, and I appreciate that, and that's one of the considerations that goes into my thinking. I mean, I realize people are under pressure. They're under pressure from a lot of fronts, and the state's a problem. But I don't see that same problem here. I just don't. We're paying attention to all our obligations. Our pensions are in good shape. The health plan is in good shape. The schools have done a fabulous job of you know, improving performance and operations. Staff is great. The town is just paying attention to keeping a lot of balls in the air. There've been some rough winters that we've got a break this year. Joe never likes to hear that. But the fact of the matter is there are unpredictable things that can happen to a municipality, and if things are operated too lean, there's no give in the system, and there was a moment where fund balance dipped, and you want to hear people that were irate, and rightly so. They were there. So not paying attention to all those dollars has a consequence. I got off my script a little bit, but the bottom line is there's a couple other points I wanted to make, and it goes to it's all well and good to have this magic target in people's minds that zeroes the figure. And in 1994, which is the year everybody's talking about with the band, you know, I have the 30 years, and it was me, Ken. I keep giving Matt credit for this, but yeah, I'm doing my best. Fine, there was a 0.5% tax increase. Everybody got what they wanted. The next year, 6.3%. 1996, 6.3%. They took a year off, 3.5%, the magic number. The year after that, 1998, 5.4%. These numbers sound good? 1999, 5.4%. So, you want to get angry? Get angry about not paying attention to the long game. You do things in the short term for some expediency, you can make problems that have a long-term consequence. We're not saying it's not important to keep all these issues, you know, and everybody's interests balanced. And I think really, if you look at the last few years, the tax increases have been going down. 3.2% in 2013, 2.6% in 2014, 3.1% in 2015. Last year, 3.1%. And this year, we were proposing 2.74%, got shot down. 2.74% included an enormous debt service increase for a high school. Everybody's been through these numbers, but the number that hasn't come out yet, and we've all said a lot, and we said a lot the last time, but the reality is if we had taken the debt service out, I want to make this just clear so people have it in their mind, of the last budget, the mill rate increase without handling the debt service would have been a negative mill rate increase. I think Mike basically said that, but it bears repeating. After the $300,000 cut, which I appreciate that people are telling us by voting the way they did that they didn't think that was enough. It drove the operating budgets and taking into consideration the revenue increases without the debt service to a negative mill rate increase. It's the debt service that is driving this number. And even with that debt service, we're below 3% which I think is a good number. It's why I was in favor of responding moderately the last time. I will be open to having a larger cut this time, because I'm also not interested in having this go another round and having what, in my opinion, would be catastrophic cuts and would be more expensive in the long run. I want to repeat that, more expensive in the long run. So anybody who wants to just go out and exercise their opportunity without considering their responsibility to everybody, keep insisting on a zero, and you'll see how expensive that gets. Thank you.
Gary?
The trouble with going toward the end is some of what I have to say is repetition, but I started off with a verb which I will not use, and I'll leave it at, I'm disappointed that 14.7% of voters came to the polls the first time and 27% of the voters came to the polls for the second referendum. I'm disappointed that Guilford citizens who voted by an almost 2-to-1 margin for a new high school failed to vote for the budget which pays for that, even though the actual number in this year's budget was less than the projection that was given to them at the time of the referendum. I'm disappointed that most citizens, including some elected officials, failed to attend budget workshops, and I hear that you're seeing the same thing on the Board of Education side, that there's very little attendance. I'm disappointed, and I understand, but that media sources provide limited coverage of town finances and budget. I'm disappointed that a Guilford citizen, clearly knowledgeable, would print and post factually false signs urging a no vote. But mostly, I'm disappointed that the Board of Selectmen, which has built the fund surplus to a reasonable level, has built short and intermediate term capital into operating costs, will now be unable to further improve our long-term health by pre-funding, as I've talked about in budget meetings, vehicles and other regularly replaceable capital expenditures, the same issue that Dr. Moore was talking about. We've gone a long way in moving short-term capital into operating budgets, and I think that's important. I think I said at the last budget, at the last meeting here, I don't want to bond repainting the community center. Those should be in operating budgets. They're there. We've, to a large degree, worked some of these into the budgets, and I would like to be able to pre-fund certain short-term capital, but we won't be able to. I recognize that we are going to have to cut, and I think we can make a major cut. I think it's going to come out of surplus. I know the First Selectman has talked to department heads, and I think there's departments that can and should be cut, but I also know that the surplus has been built up. I think it's a fool's goal to have a AAA rating. It means about 5, at most 10 basis points in our funding, which for the $16 million that we have left in the high school is somewhere between $11,000 and $22,000 a year. I don't think it's worth holding or building up our surplus to get that far. If Berkshire Hathaway can be AA, we can be AA. But I think we will get the cuts. I think they're going to come out of surplus. I think they should come out of surplus. And certain amounts out of operating budgets. And lastly, I'll close, because I'm sitting here looking at the sign of our fine senator. Our plan provides property tax relief to cities and towns. We haven't seen it. So if it's there, I'd like to be able to put it into this budget. If anybody knows where it is, let us know.
I can tell you there is some in this budget. There is additional state revenue in this budget.
There's also lost state revenue.
Well, there's net, we're still ahead. Anyway, how close are we getting to the 2-hour?
Another 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, we've got time. Anybody else?
I just wanted to state my concern for, as a new Board of Ed member, I obviously don't have all the history. So I'm listening to all the history very closely, doing my own research, and I just want to state for the record my concern with potential cuts that face the Board of Ed. I mean, we already have a very lean budget, and it's going to be very difficult at this point to employ cuts that don't directly affect the quality of our children's education. Job cuts obviously affect class sizes by increasing them. We're looking at possible extracurricular activities or sports. Obviously, that affects their education. Capital, I know I'm hearing a lot about capital, obviously, whether it be infrastructure or technology and equipment, that affects their learning environment. And I'm just really concerned that we will do something that we can't easily or swiftly undo, as it has been evidenced by the early 90s, from what I'm hearing. So, I just want to state, I know that the people that I'm talking to love our town, appreciate the education that we provide, appreciate the services that we provide to our students. And we talk about enrollment, and yes, Mr. McKenzie, enrollment has probably gone down by 600 over the last 10 years. I don't know if that figure is accurate, but I trust that it is.
It's not accurate.
Okay. But as we look at what we thought were going to be projected enrollment declines over the coming years, what we've actually seen has not been as drastic as we had anticipated. And I would just suggest that perhaps that's due to our investment in our community with a brand new high school, an IB program, and I just want to state that this makes me very nervous, and I hope we don't have a knee-jerk reaction and make cuts that the community will be sorry for, and I'll be sorry for. So.
Yes, no?
Well,
Anyone else?
can I just follow up on the enrollment decline? It actually is not true that our enrollment has gone down 600 in the last 10 years. Our enrollment in district in 2006 was 3,783, and the enrollment in district in 2015 was 3,393. The difference is 390, but 257 of the earlier group was half-day kindergarten, so they were only being taught a half a day. So in fact, if you take that 257 half-day kindergartners in 2006 and treat them as 128 full-time students, which is fair, in fact, the difference is about 272 students over the decline, or full-time students over the last 10 years. That's spread out over 13 grades and spread out over 7 schools. So I don't know where the 600 came from, but it's not accurate.
You're right, it's not 600, it's 500. It's 2005, it says 3898, and in 2015, 3393. So it's a little over 500, and it's from our high school debt issuance.
Well, I'm following the enrollment reports, so I'll stick with those numbers.
Yeah, 2005 to 2007.
Anyway, may I have a question then, or not?
Any other statements?
The only thing, if I could just add something, I think that that we do need to make substantive cuts this time around. The mandate from the voters is pretty clear with the increase in the no votes. I do want to say that I think that the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education, and more importantly, or as importantly, the town employees on the town side, the teachers and the administrators on the Board of Education and the custodians on the Board of Education side have recognized that the economy has changed. And I think that's reflected in the changing employment agreements that have been negotiated through collective bargaining over the last 10 years. And I think it's important to know that, that at least from my perspective, that the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Education, and the employees recognize that there's more changes that may be coming and different ways to approach the employment situation, which let's face it, the salaries and benefits are, the substantial portion of the town's budget. So the continued efforts by the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education with the bargaining units, I think, is where we're going to see those changes that have been discussed in terms of keeping the costs from increasing at a rate that the town can't sustain. I do think that I don't think the picture is quite as bleak as has been mentioned with regard to continuing to grow the grand list as a source of revenue for the town. There are opportunities to develop in reasonable ways, and we can't forget about the personal property taxes that are generated by the businesses that are here in town. It's not strictly real estate taxes and motor vehicle taxes that contribute a substantial portion to the town's budget. The equipment, the fixtures.
Mike is indicating the tape is out.
Okay.
That's your chance.